And we're back here at Boom and Bust. I'm your host, Tony Clement, here at the News Forum, speaking with Ashley Baker. She is the Director of Public Policy for the Committee for Justice in Washington, D.C., talking about antitrust and Google and Amazon, Twitter, Facebook, you name it. You know all the big tech companies out there. I just wanted to, get a sense of your architecture, your framework. Obviously, it's important to protect privacy rights, but how do we do that in the age where, especially during the pandemic, it's been accelerating, that so much of our lives are online? What's a good approach for that?
Oh gosh, regarding privacy, that's a huge can of worms that I have a lot of thoughts about. I do think our privacy laws are outdated in our terms of agreement. When you just click agree to everything when you download an app, there needs to be a plain English version of that. And I think there needs to be more transparency from the platforms when it comes to privacy and more standards that are set in place. I think our privacy laws, it's hard to know what you're agreeing with, and it's hard for companies to know really specifically what they're supposed to comply with in some instances. I think that's an area in which a lot of clarification is needed. It's not a competition area, though.
Mm-hmm. True enough. Is there anything to be learned from the European approach on this?
Regarding privacy, there's certainly a lot of things to be learned from the European approach, and that can be applied to a lot of areas of regulating technology. If you look at the European Privacy Directive starting back in 2002, and you track venture capital investments in European tech companies, I mean, the fact that Europe does not have a Google isn't an accident of history. It's there were declining VC investments as their regulatory system really took them out of the market, and startups tend to go to friendlier regulatory environments. And I think that's what we saw in Europe over the past 2 or 3 decades.
So how do you see, I guess I'm trying to tackle this from a number of different angles. We have these large tech companies, huge capitalization on the markets, listen, we all use them for better, for worse. We're always either online or ordering online or messaging online, whatever it is. So that's the consumer. That's the giver of the product, the technology company. How do you see government's role in all of this?
How do I see government's role in all that? That's a pretty large question.
I know.
So I think right now what we need to concentrate on what harms the consumer and what doesn't, versus what is just too big. I mean, too big, that doesn't really say much. That's just kind of a judgment call whether or not a company has too much influence. Whether or not it actually harms a consumer in terms of they could have better options, they could have better prices. I think we need to focus on this theory of harm that we've used in our courts for decades, as opposed to these intangible factors such as this company is too big. Because at one point MySpace was too big and was a monopoly that needed to be taken on. AOL was too big. So we see this evolve over the years in the same exact pattern, and big companies eventually are taken over by smaller, more innovative competitors.
Yeah, so it's not being too big by definition that's the issue. It's what harm is being done to the consumer. That's basically your approach. Is that right?
Absolutely, yes.
So, and there doesn't, again, maybe we're putting our value judgments on this, but the consumers are divided on this. Some people see an issue where other people don't. Some people see an issue, well, they're too big, therefore there's an issue, whereas other people would say just because they're big, that doesn't mean that there's an issue. Is this part of the issue that is making this a political debate?
Yes, and I think one thing that's well worth pointing out, for example, there was about 2 or 3 weeks ago, there was I believe it was an Axios poll that said 60% of Americans, and I'm not sure how many people it polled, said that they would like larger tech companies being broken up. But then there are some other polls more recently, and you see this in the privacy debate too, where if someone is presented with a trade-off, such as should this be broken up, but taxpayer resources are going all towards antitrust, where they could be going towards economic recovery during the pandemic, they never really choose antitrust as the answer there. So maybe they fundamentally don't like the size of the company. They don't like some of the other actions that they are taking. But breaking it up is not only a drastic measure, but also a measure that doesn't necessarily solve any of those problems. And if anything, might make them a little bit worse.
We'll continue our discussion with Ashley Baker after this break. Stay with us.